Khair, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh NOORUDDEEN, how are you doing today?
Assalamu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, very well. How are you?
MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I mean, we've done many videos together, so I don't really need to introduce yourself. And we've got brother Amir Nawaz, I believe it is, who's joined us again for another discussion on our channel. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brother Amir. How are you?
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, always, alhamdulillah, I'm always fine, but I have a sore throat, a chest pain, a bit sick because I've just come back from abroad, so make allowances for me if I'm a bit zonked out.
May Allah give you shifa, inshallah, and I hope you're better soon. Just like I said before, try your best not to shout too much in this discussion, like some of the discussions that happen elsewhere. So yeah, I mean, you guys are here for a discussion regarding the timings of Isha, as we made a video on it before. So Sheikh NOORUDDEEN, if you want to introduce the topic, and you guys can start the discussion from there.
Yes, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Rabbi Yassir wa'in ya Kareem. So I've made many videos in recent years with regards to Fajr and Isha. My Fajr videos tend to be around the Ramadan period. Okay, I won't make the introduction too long. Maybe we'll delve into this in our actual discussion. But my big issue with Fajr is, especially in Ramadan, what happens is a lot of masjids, and I think we discussed it on the channel as well, didn't we? We had a video on it. A lot of masjids, they put the Sahri end time or Suhoor end time too late, way late, such that they jeopardize people's fast. We had a long video on that, long discussion on that. I tend to go with what we call 18 degrees. I think Ustadh Amir, he's going to delve into some of the science of that, inshallah ta'ala. I done it in the video that we had, spoke about the natural phenomena. But and a lot of people, not just me personally, a lot of people go with 18 degrees. But then we had lots of masajid that were going with something like 13 or even 12 degrees. It was really, really troubling. The problem was they were eating, well beyond the time that you have to stop eating, and they were jeopardizing everybody's fast. Really, as far as I'm concerned, that fast that needs to be repeated. When you eat into Fajr time, you need to repeat that fast. So that's one issue we will discuss. I don't know if we're going to discuss that too much. We might have agreement on that. We may not. We'll go into that, inshallah ta'ala. And the other thing that I've spoken about a lot, and in recent weeks and months, I've been speaking about it because it's relevant to right now, is Isha. And there are many issues with what's being done with Isha prayer right now, or in the recent weeks. One of the issues is Isha prayer is coming in. Okay. If I just go into a little bit of detail, we have two opinions regarding Isha within Ahl Sunnah. You have the red twilight, you have the white twilight. Maybe we'll discuss the yellow twilight as well. Maybe we'll go into that. But, the extremes of it are red and white. Okay. And lots of masjids, they are praying Isha or were praying Isha prior to both. So let's say red twilight was disappearing at, say, 10:40. White twilight would disappearing at 11:40. They were praying at 10:30, 10:15. And I made videos on this, giving the precise times on that particular day as well. That is a huge problem. That's a huge problem. And they're doing that without telling people. Right now, at this particular moment in time, what's the date today? 29th of June, okay, 2025. 29th of June, we have persistent twilight. Okay, I don't know if it's the entire UK, but in much of the UK, we have persistent twilight. Okay, certainly in Luton, we have it. Further north, of course, you have it. Persistent twilight, when basically the white twilight is not disappearing. So again, I'm going to speak for Luton for now, even though this will be applicable to other regions in the UK, certainly applicable to London. The white twilight Isha time is not present. Okay, that's just not present. So you could say, and it would be right to say, according to white twilight, Isha is not coming in. But the red twilight Isha time is coming in. Okay, But what's happening, even though an Isha time is coming in, and in Luton it's about 11:45-ish,
Can you get me
roughly.
a small book?
Okay?
A book.
It's coming in 11:45-ish, and people are praying Isha 10:45, 11 p.m. Very few masjids up and down the country are praying Isha at the actual time. I just made a video, was it yesterday, and that's going to be released today, inshallah ta'ala, on a masjid in Banbury, Oxfordshire, where they're praying Isha on time. We've got one here in Luton Islamic Centre, where it seems they pray more or less close to the actual time, whereas almost all masjids, they pray Isha before it comes in. And one of my biggest issues with this is they don't tell anybody. They go ahead and they do these things. They don't tell anybody. Now, so that's my introduction. I want to hand over to Ustadh Amir, and I want to say that let's first and foremost discuss the things that we disagree on. And if you want to start with, because you said you want to speak about the science of it as well, if you want to start with that, I'm happy with that. But thereafter, we'll speak about anything you disagree with. We'll discuss that first, and then we'll come to other discussions.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think it's pertinent first that we do discuss. Can you hear me fine, by the way?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. So I'll try my best to speak as best as I can because of my throat. I think before we go into the fiqh, it's important to discuss some of the science, because this is a subject that the general masses are incredibly confused about, and even the ulama, because they're not versed in astronomy. A lot of the ulama also don't get it as well. And so it's you've mentioned the red twilight, the white twilight. What does this mean for the average person anyway? So let's explain this, let's clarify this, and then we can easily then move on to the fiqhi masail that come out of this. So the red twilight, shafaq al-ahmar, is at 15 degrees. So for example, let's say this is your horizon. So this is the horizon, and the sun rises here and it goes down here. Where it rises is Fajr, where it goes down is Maghrib. Now when the sun is here, it's 0 degrees on the horizontal plane, and the sun goes down and it comes back up again. But in the summer months, depending on where you are in England, it will never go down below 18 degrees, and or even less than that, depending on where you are. So when the sun goes down 15 degrees, that's when the red twilight, because when you have twilight, the sky is, it's Maghrib, it's still daytime, and it starts to get darker. So where the sun has gone down, it's yellow, then it becomes red, then it becomes white. Now where it becomes red, that's around about 15 degrees. When the redness finishes, between 15 and 18, the redness starts to finish. When it gets to 18, it's mostly white, and then that finishes by 18, and that's the time for Isha. It becomes completely dark. Depending on where you are in the world, it's very quick. Depending on how north your latitude, it takes hours. So our sun doesn't go like this. In the equator it does, so you only have like 50 minutes or something. Our sun goes like this. And in the North Pole and South Pole, it will actually go like this and back up, like this and back up. So you get 6 months of perpetual nighttime, 6 months of perpetual daylight. So this is where the problem comes in. So as the Sheikh rightly mentioned, we have 2 months of perpetual twilight in England, in London, and we have more as you move up north. So in those 2 months, it's from the 21st of June till the 21st of August, around about that time. The sun doesn't descend 18 degrees below the horizon, which means that you always have, you can call it blue twilight, and it's very dark, but it's not black, it's still blue. So the time for Isha hasn't technically kicked in. And then Fajr, you need to have darkness, and then you need to have light again for Fajr to have kicked in. So we have a problem with Isha, and as a result you have a problem with Fajr. So these are the 2 months. We'll discuss later on the options that the ulama have given us, that how we circumnavigate these 2 months, how we move through these 2 months. But the argument is the difference between 15 and 18. As the Sheikh rightly pointed out, that there are ulama that the Hanafi school, we have 2 opinions. We have the 15th and we have the 18th. A lot of the other schools, they will go with the 15th. We tend to go more with the 18th, and there's a scientific basis for that, I think, also. But the view of Imam Abu Hanifa is we go for the 18th. So generally, for most parts of the year, that's not a problem. because the sun descends below 18. We get clear demarcations for when Isha starts, and we have a Fajr time. Everything is nice. The problem is that when we move past the vernal equinox, when we move past the 2 times of the year, so if this is the north, if this is your equator, right, or the ecliptic, I'm talking the ecliptic because this way, right? In March and in September, when the clocks change, around about that time, your day and night is perfectly balanced, right? So you have an equal number of daylight hours and an equal number of night hours. As you move more towards summer, the daylight increases, the night decreases. When you get to autumn, it's the reverse. The days get shorter, the nights get longer. From the time where those clocks changes, you'll start we're now moving into the territory where the Sheikh says that we start to have problems in our timetables, right? They're clearly doing something to the timetable which is wrong, and we're seeing that they're praying when Isha hasn't kicked in, right? So this was just the science. I'm going to hand it over to the Sheikh now, who's going to give you more details.
Yeah, I actually want to establish our first disagreement. So for me, red twilight is 13 degrees. Many people who are observing it have it somewhere between 12 and 13 degrees. Okay? If I explain in a bit more detail, in the Shafi'i madhab, they clearly speak about red twilight, yellow twilight, sufra, asfar, and then white twilight, abyad. Okay? Even in some Hanafi works, they've spoken about this. Imam al-Aini spoke about this as well, spoke about the sufra as well. So you have these three. Because before I looked into it in more detail, and before I done my own observation as well, and many people I know have done observations too, I was just following those sheikhs, amongst them one of my own teachers, Sheikh Samir al-Nas, who used to say, oh, it's 15 degrees and 18 degrees, 15 degrees red twilight, 18 degrees white twilight. And then I spoke to people who've done the observations. I done the observations myself. I even went back to Sheikh Samir and I said, you know, this is a case. And he did start praying Isha at 13 degrees then, because I said, look, it's somewhere between 12 and 13. I always wait till 13. It's more cautious, inshallah ta'ala. So I do that. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm absolutely convinced by 13 degrees, the red twilight has disappeared. What remains then? The yellow and the white. Now, this is not literal, I think, as you've explained yourself. This is not literal white. It's not a white light. When we're speaking about the white, we're speaking just about remnant light. There's some remnants there. And we're speaking about yellow in this context. What's the difference between the red twilight and the yellow twilight? Red is referring to not literally red, stronger colors. Okay, bright red, bright yellow, bright orange. At 13 degrees, that disappears. You are left with pale colors alone. Okay, you're left with pale red, pale yellow, and that's the sufra. But in any case, let's speak in more detail. And I'm going to raise an issue, and obviously you can respond to that if you so choose. I think let's start with Fajr. Okay, so yeah. I go with 18 degrees for Fajr. I haven't had a successful observation of 18 degrees for Fajr. I haven't had a successful observation for Fajr. Observing Fajr, as far as I'm concerned, is far, far, far more difficult than observing Isha. The natural phenomena you're looking for Isha is much, much easier to identify. Because all you're looking for is, you need an area where there's no artificial or very little artificial light. You need to be able to see the horizon clearly, and you're dealing with strong, clear colors, and you're looking for when they disappear. It's not that difficult to observe the disappearance of red twilight. To observe the appearance, the first appearance of white twilight is very, very difficult. So I haven't personally had a successful, I haven't tried enough, haven't had a successful observation of white twilight. But again, going back to one of my teachers, Sheikh Samir, he always used to say that the astronomers, classically speaking, Muslim astronomers, they said it's 18 degrees or thereabouts. Okay, when you have a look at the works, although I have to say I've looked at it from secondary sources, I didn't go back to the primary sources myself, they tend to mention a range of between 20 and 17. Okay. But many of them went with 18 degrees. So I go with 18 degrees for Fajr. So let's start here, inshallah. Let's see if we have a disagreement or agreement or what have you. My issue is when it comes to the fast in particular, they're telling people you can carry on eating and drinking way beyond 18 degrees, okay? Sometimes all the way to 12 degrees. For me, that is insane. And I don't like I don't really want to get into the discussion of what was going on a few years ago when Ramadan was in June, July, and there was persistent twilight. Let's leave that for a moment. Let's focus on what we're having in Ramadan right now. Okay, you clearly have, you do not have persistent twilight. You clearly have awwal at-tulu', you have first light taking place. There's no issue, but they are not going with 18 degrees. They're going with 12 degrees. And even the time difference may be something like 20 minutes. You know, if it was a few hours, if we were saying, oh, according to 18 degrees, you have to stop eating at 2 a.m. and according to 12, you can carry on eating that until 6 a.m. You'd see, oh, okay, I don't agree with it, but I see why they're doing it. The difference is maybe, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, depending on which masjid it is and what they're using. So do you have any kind of disagreement there? Do you justify what they're doing? Bismillah.
Okay, so just to capping with what you were saying regarding you've never had a successful mushahada. Now this is the problem. So
Isha,
yeah, for Fajr, yeah. So for me, I haven't got a problem because I know the criterion for mushahada. Why? Because I'm an amateur astronomer, so by default I know what I'm doing. But most of the population don't know what they're doing when it comes to mushahada. Right, so number one, you need to dark adapt your eyes. I just run through this briefly, just so that people know as well, because this is not only are you saying this, everybody says this, and I've seen videos of people trying to do mushahada. They've got cameras set up, and the camera is generally more sensitive than the human eye, depending on what camera you use. And I've seen them make terrible mistakes. Right, so they've set their camera up in central London or in central Manchester or even in a village. Right, so what you need to do first of all is to get a successful mushahada to prove the point 18 degrees. Right, we know this. Astronomers across the world will tell you it's 18, even though for us we can never see the crack of dawn. Right, at that time. Why? Because we live in a light polluted world today. So for a successful mushahada, go hours drive away into the countryside, preferably go to the coast where you're looking out towards the sea. Right, give your eyes about 8 hours of light adaptation. We have cones and rods. It takes many hours to successfully adapt your eyes to the dark. And then if you look, then you can see. But if you know what you're doing, you can be in a city and you can see. Like, for example, the Milky Way. Most people haven't seen the Milky Way. I can see the Milky Way inside the city. Why? Because I know what I'm looking for. Right. So when it comes to Isha time, all mosques, it's sad to say, for the best part of 30, 40 years, they've been making mistakes. All we need to do is look back at our data, look back at our timetables going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and you'll clearly see the mistakes they've made. About 15 years ago, there was a drive in this country when, as you mentioned, Ramadan hit in June, right? Like June, July in 2011, 12. And now all of a sudden, this issue, what you're talking about, really came to the fore. So there was a concerted effort for people to get down, look at the data and reformulate it and come out with something different. So this is when people really became aware that the Muslims in this country, we've been having problems for decades. And they reformulated their models and they came out with timetables that are marginally better, but not 100% perfect. There were some mosques that had two problems. The first problem was they didn't understand the science. They would go out, even at 2 o'clock, they would go out and say, well, where is it? Where is Fajr? Right? So they would end up setting Fajr time as late as 12 degrees, right? Which there's no principle for this in fiqh in any of the schools, right? And the second one is they were doing it to make ease for their musallis, right? So now this is a problem. You're making ease with your own ijtihad, and you're breaking every single fiqh principle across all 4 schools for Fajr time and the clear Quranic command also of Fajr. That's the problem, right? So I agree with you, totally agree with you. You can even now pick up timetables from various mosques and you'll see the time, right? And you think to yourself, okay, well, this isn't 15. First of all, you can't have 15 because of the ayah in the Quran. قُولُوا وَيَشْرَبُوا حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ الْخَيْطَ الْأَبْيَضُ مِنَ الْخَيْطِ الْأَسْوَدِ min al-fajr, right? So according to that, that's clear cut. The 15 degree doesn't apply for Fajr. It's only 18 degrees that applies for Fajr. So those people who are thinking, well, we can apply 15 for Isha, so we can now use the same analogy for Fajr. No, you can't do that. So if we go by 18, and then we look at their times, well, what degree are you applying? Some are 15, some are as low as 12, right? So that's nautical twilight. So then what are you doing? Everybody needs to be aware of this. You're messing up your fasting, like you said, and all of this is if this is what you're doing regarding your Fajr. So with Fajr, I will have to agree with you that 100% there's a problem and there's no workaround. They don't have an ijtihadi principle that they can put forth and say, well, we're working around it by postulating this theory, right? It's just clear cut wrong, right? So we agree on that. But when it comes to the Isha time, then they do have something.
Before we go to Isha, let's, mashallah, we've got a point of agreement here. Personally, why I've struggled with observing Fajr myself, the biggest issue I've had is finding a place where there's no artificial light. I've been to the coast, alhamdulillah. I've been to various other places. Only the coast came close to what I was looking for, but even then there was still too much artificial light, and I've only attempted about 3 or 4 times. Obviously you need to dedicate more time to this kind of thing, but Allah Most High bless you. That's very important. Now let me raise something, because I've had a lot of discussions with people. One of the things they say to try to justify it, the audience inshallah can understand, we're completely in agreement. What they're doing for the sahri time, the suhoor time, is completely problematic. As for Fajr, no problem. For Fajr prayer, the closer you pray to sunrise, the better it is. But for the fasting, they are destroying people's fast. It's really, really troublesome, really problematic. But let me mention something. Okay, so I think in our discussion beforehand, there was Dr. Asim Yusuf's book was raised, and we raised it in our discussion as well, me and Brother Ali Akbar, the discussion we had as well. Okay, so he, if I recall correctly, goes with 12.5 degrees for Fajr. Okay, 12.5 degrees. How does he justify this? I've spoken to him, I've read from his book as well. He says, in the Hanafi madhab, you have 2 opinions with regards to Fajr start time. You have awwal al-tulu', you have first light, and you have al-intishar, the spreading of the light. Okay, so awwal al-tulu' is 18 degrees according to astronomers. He disagrees with that. He feels it's 16.5 or 16.7. He said various things in his book. Allah Most High bless him. Nice guy, I've got nothing against him. He's a very nice person. I strongly disagree with his conclusions, very strongly, because one of his conclusions is just follow your masjid. When's that been a fiqh principle? Just follow your masjid. Okay, so anyway, he said, okay, you've got awwal al-tulu', then you've got al-intishar. Awwal al-tulu' is first light, and intishar is the spreading of the light. As Ibn Abidin, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned in his Hashiyah, these are not really that different. Because as soon as light appears, the reality is what? It starts to spread. It doesn't appear, pause, and then it starts to spread. So as far as I'm concerned, these are essentially the same, right? But so he said, intishar is what it is, 16.5, 18 degrees, whatever it is. Awwal al-tulu', first light is what it is, 18 degrees, 16.5, whatever it is. But intishar is 12.5. I said, where are you getting that from? What's your definition of al-intishar in the first place? He said to me, it's min al-ufuqi ila al-ufuq. It's when the light spreads from one horizon to the other. It's covered the horizon. I said, that sounds very nice, but
and that's subjective, because again it's to do with mushahada, because they don't know the skills of a proper mushahada. They're seeing that light spread from one side to the other side incredibly late. Right? Somebody who knows what dark adaptation is, somebody who knows what first light is, can see the faint light when you can't see it. Right? So this is the reason why the ulama have fixed it at 18, because since the beginning of time, man has known that first light, that the subtle change between black and dark blue is at 18 degrees. Right? It's a universal principle across the world. But just because we can't see it, the problem is with our science of astronomy. We're not versed as Muslims with the science of astronomy as we should have, right? It was called the mother of sciences, right, for a reason. And astronomy was taught in depth as part of an Islamic curriculum back in the day, alongside Tib, right? But sadly, we've lost that art now, right? So that's led to all of these problems today.
Yeah. So obviously you have that issue of, is it being observed properly? But even prior to that, look, we're speaking about a legal ruling, and you've given us a legal definition. The legal definition is min al-ufuqi ila al-ufuq, from the horizon to the horizon. Okay? And obviously the astronomical problem, that's fine. I accept that, no problem. But to present that as an opinion of the Hanafi madhab, what do you have to do? You have to present it from Hanafi books. So I said to him, show me where this is. Okay? It's been quite a few years since I had this discussion with him. He said, Maraqi al-Falah. I said, okay, interesting. I've read Maraqi al-Falah multiple times. So I haven't. Please show me. Obviously, you forget things. You might read something, you forget it. Show me. Okay. A few days passed. He said, it's not there. I said, okay, show me where it is. And look, Allah Most High bless him. He was very honest. Okay. Ultimately, he came back and he said, it's not anywhere. I can't see it anywhere. I said, that's a huge problem then. Your working definition of al-intishar, it's got no support whatsoever. And to the contrary, we have Ibn Abidin, for example, essentially saying these are very similar. You know, there's not this massive difference there's not a 6-degree difference between these two. So, you know, people might make those kind of arguments. One of the problems I have with this discussion is, as you said, a lot of people are not aware of the situation. And with many of them, because imams who are leading prayer in the masjid, they need to make themselves aware. But what a lot of them do, they look into it very superficially. And then they get an answer, they get a line, they get a talking point, and then they just throw it at people. They'll say something like, well, Isha is not coming in anyway. No. Yeah, at a certain point, in certain places, that might be the case, but is that the case for you here, in this place or this place? For example, in Luton, okay? You know, going back a few weeks, red twilight and white twilight, Isha was coming in, and they were saying, Isha's not coming in, we can pray it whenever we like. See? And then even when white twilight, Isha is not coming in, red twilight is still coming in. But it's very superficial, no real understanding of what's going on, and no real understanding, unfortunately, of the legal rulings. And that's it, they just throw something at people. But khair, inshallah, I think with Fajr, we're fine. There's not really much more to discuss.
Is it okay if I can just quickly say something? Yeah, because when we initially made the video on the timing of Fajr, we didn't really see a response from the scholars or the imams in the masjid, or the people who are actually printing the calendars out. So, Brother Amir, before we move on, I would like to ask the question that what message would you give to the people, the public, the audience, the people who are the followers, about the timing of Fajr, especially in Ramadan, because they're fasting at the same time, so they can't just fast later. Obviously, when Fajr time is already in and they're still eating, what message would you like to give to the audience, and what can they do?
Okay, so the message I'd like to give to the ulama first, because I think we need to address them first, is when they're having their think tanks, if they've had a think tank, or if they're having these think tanks, when they sit down together and say, hey, let's formulate something, let's find out the science, let's find out the fatwa, let's put something forward. We want to see that research. We have a right to see that research. It's not a secret society where only they know and we cannot scrutinize, right? Because there are astronomers, Muslim astronomers in this country. There are Muslim scientists in this country, right? The fiqh is not too difficult to understand regarding these issues. The science may be difficult for the ulama, but the fiqh is not difficult for the layman or for the ulama, right? Marry them together, give us the research, let us go through it, sit with us as well, right? And let's come forth with something. The problem I have is when they have these discussions, do they publicize any periodicals? They're not going to have periodicals. Forget the periodicals, but where are those one-off papers that they've all signed to and all agreed? We want to see that. We want to see those. The second thing is that for the everyday Muslim, it's been proven categorically that we've been making persistent mistakes on this for the last 50 years. And even today, there's been a loud drive for the last 10 years, and still many mosques are making these mistakes. Do not put your iman into the hands of mosque committees, who are the general laity, right? Check into the science. You have, the onus is upon yourself. It's actually part of the obligatory knowledge, fardul ayn, which every Muslim needs to know. You need to know enough fiqh to discharge your own obligations of worship without having to ask anybody, right? So then you don't need to ask your committee member. Once you see the timetable, you like your own fiqh knowledge to tell you there's a problem here, right? Yeah. So when you are in those situations, it's no longer a case of following your mosque. It's about you go by the knowledge that you know, that you've been taught in your fiqh, right? And if you haven't studied it, then that's another problem. That's your problem. But you should know this, right? And then just apply your own fajr, right? Your own, especially when it comes to imsak, right? I mean, like the sheikh said, when it comes to the jama'ah time, it's not a problem. It's never a problem. The imsak is the problem. You need to know the time for imsak by yourself, right? Because we cannot rely on mosque committees, because a lot of their timetables are wrong. That's what I would say.
I'll just add to that, it's not so difficult nowadays because there are so many timetables everywhere. Like, I'll be quite frank, when I first came across this issue, early 2000s, I think it was 2002, I first came across this issue, all of the masjids, their timetables were all problematic, right? And it was very difficult. Even if I were to raise it with somebody, they'd say, yeah, well, all of these mosques are wrong and you're right.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you got so many apps, you got so many websites, and people's own apps that they use. Like one of the apps that's quite common is I think they've called it al-adhan now. Okay, there the Isha time is like 11:30, 11:40, depending on where you are. So now there's no excuse. There's no like, okay, what we're supposed to go by this one obscure individual with some obscure timetable that nobody has. No, the information now is everywhere. It's really quite easy to understand. Hold on, my masjid is praying at 10:45, but this timetable is saying it doesn't even come in till 11:45. Let's look into this. Now, there's no excuse now to say, oh, yeah, I didn't even know there's a problem. It's quite well known now. Anyway, let's move on to Isha. So the first thing I want to raise is when white twilight Isha is coming in and red twilight Isha is coming in, and they are still praying early. I think we're going to agree on this, but let's see, inshallah ta'ala. As far as I'm concerned, that is ridiculous. Okay, when Isha time is coming in, so the white twilight is disappearing. So according to Abu Hanifa, Isha is in, and many Sahaba who have that opinion as well. The red twilight is disappearing. So according to the students of Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad, Isha is coming in. Okay. But a lot of the masjids are still praying it early, okay? And a lot of them don't even know they're doing this because they refuse to look into the issue. They are praying it before both times. So we've got times from Sahaba, meaning natural phenomena that needs to take place. We've got times from the Imams of Ahlul Sunnah. They're ignoring all of that. We've got the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that speaks about the disappearance of the shafaq, okay? And we've got these imams saying, well, Maulana Saab or Mufti Saab or this panel of Muftis somewhere, they said we can pray an hour after Maghrib. They said we can pray, an hour and a quarter after Maghrib. They said we can pray 90 minutes after Maghrib. So that's what we're doing. Why are you doing that? You're supposed to be muftis, you're supposed to be scholars. Your first port of call is always Quran and Sunnah, and of course we're Sunni Muslims, so then you go to the madhabs. Why are you ignoring all of that and you're praying Isha according to, this Mufti Saab or this group of Mufti Saabs? Makes no sense whatsoever. And for me, what makes it clear that they know there's a problem with what they're doing is they don't tell people. They don't announce, they don't do a Jummah khutbah. Oh, by the way, we're praying Isha before it comes in, and here's why. Let us explain to you from Quran and Sunnah why that is the case. They don't do that. Let us show you from the Hanafi madhab why we're doing this. They don't do any of that. Why don't they do it? Because as far as I'm concerned, this is a very opinion, not very completely baseless opinion. Ustadh Ahmed, if you go ahead, please.
Okay, so I agree with your premise. However, there's a caveat. There is a method to this madness. It's not madness. There is a method to the madness. There is a method to what they're doing, right? So I need to go back into the origination of the fiqh just for a little bit, and then touch on where they get the idea from that you're challenging, basically. So if we look at the first problem that the Muslims ever had, and it happened to be the Hanafis, because the Hanafi fiqh penetrated northern climes, northern latitudes, right? The northern part of the world is all Hanafi, right? It's just spread out, whereas the other schools are pretty centralized. They don't really have these problems or come across these problems. So what happened with the Hanafis is that at some point in history during the Abbasid Caliphate, the Muslims ended up penetrating into today it's in the land of Russia, it's in Tataristan, in Kazan, in the lands of the Bulgar, right? Back then it was like Khanates and various Central Asian steppe tribes living there. The Muslims ended up penetrating there. That was at a latitude of 54 degrees. That's very high. London is 51. We have 2 months of perpetual twilight. 54 is the same as Scotland. It's the same as Glasgow, right? So we're talking Isha, Maghrib times of past 10 o'clock. Now, when the Muslims entered those lands, they had an immediate problem. What do we do for prayer times? Because we can clearly see there's no Isha time and there's a problem with Fajr. And what do we do, right? In one of the battles of Tamerlane was in Uzbekistan. He ended up chasing the Golden Horde so far north that even his ulama complained that, okay, now we've also got this problem. What do we do, right? So this was something very new. We've only really penetrated that north as Muslims since we moved into Europe, right? England is actually quite high. We fail to realize this. England should be much colder than it really is, but it's not, because we have the Gulf Stream from Florida that warms our seas, and that's why we have rain and not the same Arctic weather that we have in Europe, right? At the same time, the same seasons. So otherwise, we're actually quite high, quite north. So what happened is, if you look at his name was who is this person? Just 1 second here. Yeah. So Imam Ahmad ibn Fudlan. Imam Ibn Fudlan is a very famous historian. He gave us an excellent account of a Viking burial, right? And it's the only account we have of a live Viking burial. He saw the Rus people over there, and he also gave an account of Bulgar. He visited Bulgar, and he turned around and he said that they have this problem, right, with prayer times. And I'm not talking about perpetual twilight. I'm talking about what Sheikh is mentioning here, with come end of March or April, where all of a sudden you have 15 degrees, you have 18 degrees, and Fajr is coming in before. What's going on, right? So I'm addressing this issue directly, what Sheikh is talking about. So he said that he saw a variety of different methods that were being implemented in that specific area, right? Now, Imam Nawawi mentions in all of these different ways, the 4 different ways: Aqrab al-Ayyam, Nisf al-Layl, Aqrab al-Bilad, right? Imam Nawawi mentions this in his Majmu'ah, and Imam Abidin discusses this, quoting from the Shafi'i madhab also in his Rad al-Mukhtar. So these methods that we're using in the UK to apply at these conclusions have a precedent in the past, right? So there is a precedent with what they're doing, right? Now, I'll go back to Bulgar later, but just to cap it at what the Sheikh says, is they're looking at haraj. They're basically looking at haraj, because slowly, even before...
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to jump in, because otherwise we're going to go too far forward, okay? These type of methods, they apply when Isha is not coming in. They're not applicable.
Yeah, they apply them earlier.
No, but,
right? But
let's not confuse anybody. Let's not confuse as a masses. Did Imam an-Nawawi say you can apply these methods when Isha is coming in and you can pray early? Is that your claim?
Okay, Imam Nawawi wouldn't have said this, because Imam Nawawi was in the Nawar or Damascus, right?
All right.
And he didn't experience what was happening further up north.
Let's forget Imam Nawawi. Which Hanafis, because we just said Hanafis experienced this. Hanafi was speaking about Bulgar for a long time, and what was happening in Bulgar for a long time. Okay, which Hanafi said even when Isha comes in, you can apply these methods and start praying before it comes in?
It's the principle of ḥaraj.
Forget ḥaraj for a moment. Let's take it one step at a time. Okay. Which Hanafi Imams, I'm not speaking about contemporary Maulanas, which Hanafi Imams said, because you yourself have said, oh, in Bulgar, Isha was so late, and then Isha was not, no problem. So they experienced it, right? The ḥaraj was there. Which Hanafi Imams said, pray Isha before it comes in because it's hard, it's difficult?
It would have been the Imams of Bulgar.
No. Look, we have a library in the Hanafi madhab, right? We have authentic, accepted works, right? Which of the works? Was it Imam Sarakhsi's works? Was it Imam Ibn Abidin's works? Was it Imam al-Zayla'i's works? Was it Ibn Humam? Was it Ibn Nujaym? Which of our authenticated Imams that convey the madhab to us said, even when Isha is coming in, pray early? I think now we have an actual dispute between me and yourself.
When if Isha comes in, but they wouldn't have known that Isha comes in at 11:30, for example, right? So
no,
for them, they wouldn't go into the details. Generally, as a principle, we know that we take fatwa from ulama in those places, right? If I need a fatwa to do with something in England, I'm not going to ring Pakistan and say, I need a fatwa. I'm Pakistani, you're Pakistani.
People in England are going against what's established in Quran, Hadith, and classical scholars, then we're going to get other scholars involved, right?
Yeah.
Was Ibn Abidin aware of Bulgar or not?
Yes, he was aware.
Yes, he was. Were scholars prior to him aware of Bulgar or not? Yes, they were.
Yep.
What happened in Bulgar happened very, very, relatively speaking, early on. Okay, these imams were aware of it. Okay, they're not stupid. They do understand that if you're going to have a certain point when Isha stops coming in, then you're also going to have a point when Isha is very late. You see, despite that, nobody gave that fatwa. We can speak about ḥaraj. I don't mind speaking about ḥaraj later, but I want to make it very clear for the audience, to my knowledge. You can correct me. I don't claim to know everything in the Hanafi works. To my knowledge, none of the classical agreed upon Hanafi imams, nobody said, "'Cause Isha is late, pray early. Make up a time, pray early." I do agree with yourself. When red twilight and white twilight are not coming in, then of course we're going to have to apply one of the methods that you've mentioned. I've got no issue with that whatsoever. Right now in Scotland, neither red twilight nor white twilight is disappearing. They're going to have to do one of the things that you've mentioned. My concern is places like Luton and London and, even going further north, Isha, prior to now, both Ishas were coming in, and now Isha, red twilight, is coming in. This is my point, and I will go on to ḥaraj. As soon as you either agree or disagree that the classical imams of the Hanafi madhab did not say what these contemporary people are doing, which is Isha's coming in, just pray early. Okay, then we can have the discussion regarding ḥaraj thereafter.
Okay, so I wouldn't claim to have to say that I've read all of the classical works in their entirety. Right, as you do your studies, you skim through it and you only concentrate on bits that concern you.
Yeah.
So I'm not in a position to say yes or no, but I would hazard a guess and say probably not. Okay. Right? They probably didn't mention it, but then that's not the be all or end all of fiqh.
Okay, we're going to come to that. Okay, now we can move on. Let me just comment on that, then we can move on. Okay, I will say the people who are doing this, when I've challenged them and said to them, show me who allowed you from our classical scholars, never ever have they mentioned the classical work. They always mention Maulana Sahib or this group of Maulana Sahibs. Okay, oh, there's this group of muftis, they have said it. There's this Maulana Fulan said it. When I say I don't care about Maulana Fulan, I'm not going to use my teachers and you're not going to use your teachers. We're going to use the works that everybody agrees upon that present the Hanafi madhab. Okay, and then they can tell us. Now let's move on to ḥaraj. Okay, and I'm going to hand over to yourself. So now the point being raised is, hold on a minute. Look, in certain parts of the UK, if you make people pray at the right time, with all of the flexibility that's within the red twilight, white twilight, you're still going to ask people to pray at midnight. Okay, they're going to pray Isha at midnight. They're going to wake up at 3 a.m., 3:30, 4 o'clock to pray Fajr. They're not going to get enough sleep. Some of them then have to go to work at 6. They need to leave home at 5. They're not going to get enough sleep. They're not going to get enough rest. Okay, so therefore, we should let them pray Isha early. Let's go to this discussion now. And as you mentioned, ḥaraj. So the principle here is it's too difficult, it's too hard, it's too tough for people. So let's give them something that makes their life easier and they can pray Isha. Even then, I accept, by the way, I accept it's difficult. I'm not unrealistic, inshallah. I accept it's very difficult to ask somebody to pray Isha at midnight, get up at 3:30, pray Fajr, and then go to work half an hour later, an hour later. Then most people would struggle even to get back to sleep. They're gonna struggle to have that time to rest. So I accept that it's difficult. I strongly reject what they've done to resolve that difficulty. Now, so I'm going to hand back over to yourself.
Okay, so I don't reject what they've done, and I'll prove my stance here. So this is a major disagreement between us, right? It's good we're having this conversation. I'm just going to raise one point for the audience, because sometimes the audience, they kind of don't follow along with the details. So I'm just going to give them one analogy that they can understand before I move on, right? So when it comes to the Hanafi madhab, we have the Indo-Pak school, and then we have the Shami school. Now, fatwas are different in both countries, and you think, well, your primary sources are the same, everything is the same, your deriving principles or usuls are the same, how comes you're ending up at different fatwa? One case in example would be the fatwa on dolls, children playing with dolls. The fatwa in the Indian subcontinent is far more stricter than it would be in Sham. The fatwa there is that no, they're not allowed, right? But whereas when it comes to the Sham, the fatwa is softer. Yes, children need to play with dolls. It gives nurturing skills to children. You know, it develops a child, especially a girl, X, Y, and Z, right? So then why the difference in the fatwa when the
I'm so sorry, I'm going to have to jump in there as well. You know, why is that fatwa different? We have hadith that dolls were played with, right? You don't even need to go down the route of nurturing skills. It's about dalil, it's about evidence. We have hadith that dolls will play with, okay? And then we've got the classical authoritative works of the madhab. Now, if some subcontinent scholar now or 100 years ago diverts from the works of the Hanafi madhab, why should we take that seriously? Some Shami scholar now diverts from the fatwa of the madhab, from what's established in the books, or even a small group of them. Why should we take that as, oh, this is all valid? Now, I know I don't want to spend too much time on principles. Maybe we could have another debate afterwards. Inshallah, we'll come back for a third one. There's a second one now, where we speak about principles and reality. But let me, principles in the madhab and how fatwa should be given and such things. I'm going to let you carry on, but I just want the audience.
All right, okay, let's move on. All right, fine. Okay, I'm just going to move on.
I strongly disagree with this idea that scholars, be they Shami, be they Egyptian, be they Pakistani, be they from Bangladesh, India, why do they have the right just to go against the books of the madhab? But sorry, you carry on. That's a debate for another time.
Yeah, so springboarding on the back of this difference in the nafs al-usul, but there's difference in the fatawa, right? So I'm gonna go directly to Bulgar now to see what they did in Bulgar, right? So according to the report by Imam Marjani was a very late scholar of Bulgar during the time of the just before the Bolsheviks, during the time when the Russians had completely dominated Bulgar. He was citing Ibn Khaldun, as I mentioned. Ibn Khaldun was tasked by the Abbasids to go and make a detailed report of those areas. So Ibn Khaldun said, I just want to tell you what was happening. So this is the precedent that the Hanafis are using. This is what Ibn Khaldun said. He said the people of Bulgar, as discussed by Imam adopted a number of positions rather than agreeing upon one position when it came to the two prayers in extreme circumstances. Extreme circumstances for them, by the way, is for 4 months or 4 months of the year, and both ends would be a late Isha, right? So some considered the Isha no longer compulsory due to the absence of a sabab. Imam Marjani disagreed with this position, but this is what the ulama were, that was their ijtihad. Hanafi ulama, that was their ijtihad, right? And don't forget, like we have Imam Marghanini, we have Imam Ashi, we have Qadi Khan, and all of them are from that same area, right? These are the greats of the Hanafi ulama, the Hanafi fiqh. So some considered it valid by adopting a precautious attitude. However, for fear that it may not be compulsory, prayer prayed it individually, due to the position of the Hanafi school that not praying a supererogatory prayer, which it may be in so you can't pray supererogatory in congregation. So we're not sure, the time's not kicked in, but pray it singly, it might get accepted, it might not, right? Some prayed it by adopting the school of Imam Malik or Imam Shafi'i or other fuqaha. In other words, they viewed it compulsory and prayed it by utilizing their methods as detailed below in exceptional circumstances. Some were of the view that the prayer time had occurred because the shafaq that needed to be considered was a shafaq al-ahmar, which had disappeared. Therefore, this is referred to those days in which it would disappear. Some were of the view that the shafaq should disappear in the direction of the horizon in which the sun had set. In other words, the western horizon. The light on the eastern horizon was considered as the start of dawn. As a result, the night was split into two, nisful layl, the first half representing night and the second half representing dawn. So they would not eat after the night in which they were fasting the next day. Some prayed Isha, but with the view that it was qada of the Isha for the night before, because there's no alamat, there's no signs for Isha. Some would calculate based upon the countries close, aqrab al-bilad, to them by continue to have shafaq disappearing. So the precedent is there from 1,000 years ago. Right?
Like, this is a massive conflation. This is a huge conflation. This is very problematic. Now you're doing what some of these imams in the mosque say. You're not coming in just do what you like. No, this is a huge conflation. Look, you mentioned Imam Marghinani, okay? And there are many, many other scholars in the madhab. They spoke about that. They spoke about when Isha doesn't come in, what to do at that time, okay? And we have lots of scholars, amongst them Imam Shurumbulali, I believe in Nur al-Idah, but definitely in Maraqi al-Falah, he went with the opinion, if Isha is not coming in, don't pray it. These scholars were well aware of what's going on. You yourself said, you know, some of them lived there. They're well aware of what was going on. Show me one of them. You're reading history. Fine, no problem. That's history, right? Fiqh is taken from the authoritative works of the Hanafi ulama. Okay, show me any of these scholars. Start with Imam Marghinani if you like. Go further back. Show me any of them.
This is the ijtihad on the ulama of Bulgar based on first principles. They're using the usul and they're deriving further for their own situation, look, right? So you're not going to find it. I agree with you. You're probably not going to find it in the primary text. But then that's not how fiqh works for us.
Of course, that's how fiqh works.
Not 100% of the time. That we can when the circumstances arises, we will derive.
All right. Look, you've read the Hashia, right? Hashia of Ibn Abidin, right? When he's delivering fiqh rulings, we're getting into methodology once again. When he's delivering fiqh rulings, what's he referring to? He's referring to the books of the madhab, the recognized books of the madhab. That's how fiqh works. That's how Hanafi, Shafi, the madhabs, that's how they work. We don't say, let's open up a book of history, see what some scholars were doing at this point, and let's say, oh, that's our position. Yeah, if Imam Marghinani recorded this as a sound opinion in his works, or Imam al-Zayla'i, who also spoke about this issue, recorded this as a sound opinion in his works, fine, we can go with it. This as a methodology is madness. I'm going to find a book of Tariq, find certain scholars in certain place at a certain time, they were doing certain things, and therefore that's the madhab. If I give you a much more contemporary example, okay? If we find certain historians, go forward 100 years, right? Somebody wrote about the history of Pakistan, India, and many other lands which are non-Arab lands, okay? Wrote about the history, and they wrote that, oh, many of the muftis and the scholars and the greatest imams in that area, they were reciting Quran with zero tajweed, okay? Zero. They had no knowledge of tajweed whatsoever. They were making so many mistakes. And then somebody says, yeah, that's fine. You know, that was their way. They accepted it. Those scholars had no issue with it. Those scholars didn't say your prayer is invalid. So, and it's in the history books, this was going on. That's not how fiqh works. You need to reference back to authoritative works of the madhab, those works that are agreed upon. You said yourself that these scholars, they were aware of what was going on, yet they did not say, when Isha is coming in, make up a time and start praying it at a made up time. They did say, when Isha stops coming in, many of them said, I don't agree with this, but many of them said, you don't have to pray Isha. As I said, Imam Shurumbulali, even amongst slightly later scholars, he said the same thing.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to stop you there for
opinion.
One question here. So I agree with you. Up to now, I agree with you. When Isha stops coming in, the fatwa kick in, right? So let's say today is the last day for Isha to stop coming in. So the time now is 12 o'clock midnight, and your Isha starts at 12 o'clock midnight. From tomorrow, there's no Isha time.
Yeah.
Right? So are you going to carry on praying Isha till 12 o'clock midnight, and then from tomorrow you're going to say, well, now we're going to revert back and Isha's all of a sudden going to be 10 o'clock?
Yeah, that's a separate discussion. I'm happy to have that discussion.
This is what's happening,
when you have that discussion with me, I'm not going to accuse of you of conflating the masail, okay? It's very, very clear that when there's no Isha, then we can start speaking about this methodology. What should we do? Nisf layl, aqrab al-bilad. We can have that discussion then. What I object to really strongly is presenting the Hanafi madhab as Isha is coming in and you pray early because the scholars of Bulgar were doing it. You can go down the road of ḥaraj, and we can have that discussion, hardship, okay? And maybe that's a discussion we should have right now, okay? Because I think that's quite an interesting discussion. But I will not accept a conflation, and I'm not accusing you of anything, but I feel that the public is going to misunderstand this. I can't accept anybody to misunderstand that any classical authoritative works of the Hanafi madhab say Isha is coming in, pray it before it comes in. We never ever had that. We had the discussion if it's not coming in, what to do. And as I said, I agree with Ibn Humam rahimahullah ta'ala that it must be prayed. And I know Imam Shurun Bulali disagreed with this, but Ibn Humam, he used the hadith in Sahih Muslim of the Dajjal, when the Dajjal comes and one day will be like a year. And the Sahaba, they asked, "O Messenger of Allah, at that time, will one prayer or one day's worth of prayer suffice us?" And the Prophet ﷺ said, "No, you have to estimate it." Imam Ibn Humam used that as a basis to say, even if the physical phenomena for Isha is not coming in, you still have to estimate and you have to pray. Okay, but I accept there's a difference of opinion there. I accept great Hanafi scholars have said when Isha is not coming in, don't pray. But that's not what I'm arguing. I'm arguing when it is coming in, then they're praying it early. So now let's go down the route of ḥaraj. Let me present what I'm saying, and then I'll hand it over to yourself. So yes, a lot of these scholars, they will say it's really hard to ask somebody to pray Isha at midnight and then wake up for Fajr at 3:30, 4 o'clock, and then go to work. Okay, obviously some people can go back to sleep because their work starts later. I agree that's very, very difficult. Okay, but years ago, when I first started looking into this, I spoke to a Maulana, Deobandi Maulana. I believe he was called Yaqub Qasimi. Okay, and a lot of the Deobandis, when I would speak to the masjids and say what you're doing, they would put me to him. Unfortunately, a lot of the Barelvis, when I would speak to them and ask them what's going on, they'd put me on to some Maulana who's in Pakistan. I said, how am I going to communicate with this guy? But this guy, Maulana Yaqub Qasimi, I had numerous conversations with him. He sent me his book as well. Okay, he said this. He said, there's ḥaraj, it's very difficult. People have to pray Isha very late, then they have to get up early. This is too hard. Okay, and I'm going to try to say almost verbatim what he said to me. He said, other than the Hanafi madhab, all madhabs allow you to join prayers.
Yeah. When
there is hardship. This hardship is more difficult than the hardship of traveling, because they allow you to join prayers when you're a traveler. And by the way, his explanation, I've got no issue with that. I agree with every word he said so far. Okay, I agree that it's harder to stay up till midnight and pray Isha and then get up for Fajr really early than to pray when you're traveling. I agree with every word he said. I don't agree with his conclusion. I strongly disagree with his conclusion. He said, therefore, because all of these madhabs allow you to join prayers, as Hanafis, we are allowed to follow other madhabs. I agree. No problem, inshallah ta'ala. Okay. Therefore, we will pray Isha an hour after Maghrib, okay, or an hour and a half, or a period after Maghrib before it comes in. Okay, that's where I disagree. I remember at the time I spoke to Sheikh Samir al-Nas, one of my teachers, and I said to him, look, Sheikh, this doesn't make any sense to me. What do you think? I don't have much knowledge. I was at the beginning of my Islamic studies journey. What do you think? Sheikh said, even I disagree with what they're doing. Okay, I disagree. They should pray Isha on time. Okay, but Sheikh said this, and I agree with this 100%. He said, but if they are going to do that, if they are going to join prayers, do it properly. pray Maghrib, give salam, pray Isha. What's this nonsense of pray Maghrib, an hour later pray Isha? How does that deal with the ḥaraj? How does that deal with the hardship? So this is where I'm going to make my concluding point. I will say those Maulanas who are saying we're going to pray Isha before it comes in, even though Isha is coming in, we're going to pray it before it comes in because it's difficult for people. I'm going to say to them, if you're insistent on doing that, join your prayers. Okay. Now, I'm not joining my prayers and I'm not going to advocate for it, but I'm going to say, you Maulanas, it is far better for you to tell the people to join their prayers rather than to pray Maghrib and an hour later pray Isha. First and foremost, you have a precedence for that in hadith, as far as the other three madhabs are concerned. Even in the Hanafi madhab, you join prayers on Muzdalifah night for the Hajji, right? You have a precedence for it in hadith. You have a precedence for it in the madhabs of Ahl Sunnah. Why don't you do that rather than making something up? Now, I personally, at this point, I don't advocate for joining prayers because I need something before I can advocate for joining prayers. I need one of the four madhabs to show me clearly that we allow joining prayers when Isha is late. But I'm going to say to these people, you're already doing something nonsense, which is praying Isha before it comes in. Why don't you do something which makes much more sense, which is, and which has precedence? Pray Maghrib, make salam, pray Isha. Now you're actually removing the ḥaraj. There, people could have prayed Isha by 10 p.m., 10:15, go home, go to sleep, get up at 3:30, 4 a.m. They've had a good chunk of sleep. Neither are you helping people a great deal when you say, let's just pray at 11 p.m., nor are you following the precedents we have in hadith and in the madhabs, and nor are you actually telling people anything. I think, now I'm speculating here and you can oppose me on this, no problem. I think one of the reasons they won't do that is because they want to hide it from the public. Because when you do that, then the public knows full well you are praying Isha before it comes in. Okay? But I would, for these Mawlanas, I don't advocate that myself yet. Okay? I need to see it from one of the four madhabs. But for these Mawlanas, I would say it's far superior for to just join the prayers rather than doing the nonsense you're doing. I apologize, Sadie, I took too much time.
Well, okay. So I agree with what you're saying. There's only one point of disagreement. So I agree with ḥaraj, but I also agree with you that the time frame that they're using for ḥaraj, this is my problem with them as well, right? So they're going to start using ḥaraj maybe late March, April, right? So that's problematic for me. But when it gets to May, I would say, right, then I would have to agree that there is ḥaraj, and I would side with them. I know that you disagree here, but I would side with them only because
Saidi, I don't disagree with ḥaraj. I agree with you there's ḥaraj. I just disagree with
then that means that Isha time would have to kick in even before 15 degrees, right? That's the problem. Right now, as a collective, all of the ulama, especially people like Wifaq ulama, they've sat down and had these discussions, and when they pass fatwa all agreeing on this, then who am I to challenge that? Right? So then there must be some precedent.
Say that this is wrong. This is wrong. You have a bunch of scholars who come and give a fatwa that many other great contemporary scholars are going to disagree with, and you say, who am I to challenge it? Okay, so if a bunch of scholars get together, 50, 60, you said 100 scholars get together and say free mixing is allowed, you're going to say, who am I to disagree with them? Or they say drinking alcohol is allowed, or they say LGBTQ is fine, who am I to? That in principle is wrong.
But we're talking about black and white and gray areas. These are technical areas and they're gray areas. I mean, what's the sliding scale? What would be the sliding scale of ḥaraj, right? What's not ḥaraj for you might be ḥaraj for somebody else. How do they formulate it? Where do you set the bars and the barriers?
You could say the same thing with free mixing. What's the precise definition of free mixing? If you do this, is it free mixing? If you do this, it's not free mixing. You can always have that argument, and you can always present it as black and white as well. Black and white, Isha has to be prayed after it comes in. Isha cannot be prayed before it comes in. But in any case, are you
comfortable with praying Isha at 12 o'clock at night?
Sorry?
Are you comfortable with praying Isha at 12 o'clock at night?
Yeah, I do. I follow.
And what about your children that need to go to school the next day?
Yeah, at the moment they're young. But the point is, I don't believe I have the right to say to my children, just pray early. I can't do that. I'm not allowed to do that. Okay, when there's something difficult, I need to find a solution from what exists, not invent something new. I'm still seeking, and I will continue to seek, one of the four madhabs. I found something, inshallah, and I'll mention that in a moment. One of the four madhabs that says join the prayers. Okay, so we have a video on the Islam Answers YouTube channel where Sheikh Muhammad Jamili, speaking from the Shafi perspective, he gives details of, you know, what can be considered ḥaraj, what can't, and then yes, you can join the prayers when Isha is very late. He doesn't give a blanket answer. He doesn't give a blanket fatwa. Isha is late, just pray. He goes into detail. You see? So that right now, that's my solution. If I find the Malikis or the Hanbalis saying that when Isha it gets to this time or it's this late, blanket fatwa, ḥaraj, join your prayers, that's what I'm going to tell my children to do. Okay? I'm not going to say something stupid like, it's really difficult, so pray Maghrib at 9:30, pray Isha at 11. That'll help you out. Firstly, how does it help them? And secondly, why am I just making things up? Whereas if I can find from the Maliki, the Hanbali school, if they say that, we will allow you to join prayers here, I'm going to go with that. I'm going to be very, very comfortable with that. And if I find nothing, I will try to apply what exists, and I'm not going to make up anything new.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with your stance. I can clearly understand it, but I'm just trying to keep myself a bit humble here. And I see the problem. I understand the problem. I actually agree with you as well. I wholeheartedly agree with you.
I'm not trying to be arrogant.
But because the ulama, and I've spoken to them as well, right? Some of them.
The ulama I disagree with. The ulama is a problem, right? Because it's a particular group of them, right? Now, what about the ulama who say follow Saudi moon sighting? We had a moon sighting debate before, right? What about the ulama?
You agree with that stance, and I don't agree with that stance.
You know I don't agree with that stance. You know I don't agree with.
You said if Saudi sees the moon, faqat they've seen it. We don't need to check into the details if they're lying.
That's very different, Saidi. You know moon sighting. That is very different to saying just follow Saudi. You know I follow the first moon sighting. Okay. And
which happens to be Saudi, which most likely happens to be Saudi.
Look, Saidi, we had this discussion, not always. In the last 3 years, on 2 separate occasions, I've performed Eid prayer the day before Saudi. You know,
because what you've done is you gave your own interpretation to the hadith of Qurayb and the hadith of the Bedouins that came in from the desert, right? Just a quick one. So the Bedouins came in, but according to you, you said that that's a mushahida that can be taken from anywhere. But the argument is that they were just outside Medina.
Saidi, right? Look, now you're not being fair to me now.
No,
that is mentioned in the Hanafi works. Okay, that is very clearly mentioned in the Hanafi works, that anywhere in the Muslim world where you have a qadi and he gives a fatwa. So please, I don't want to make this antagonistic. I don't want to make our discussion. Look, we can disagree. I don't want to make it antagonistic. I will
discuss that in the past.
I will endeavor my absolute best never ever to misrepresent what you're saying. I will ask you what you're saying rather than to misrepresent. You know I don't follow Saudi.
I know, yeah. But you follow first sight.
And you know the hadith I cited from Ibn Majah, that's not my interpretation. That is the interpretation of the Hanafi madhab for the start of Ramadan and the end of Ramadan. But in any case, let's get back to our point. Fadla Saidi, you were saying.
Yeah, so like I said,
if they're going to do it, join the prayers.
Yeah, I've had this discussion with somebody who knows the science very well. He knows the ulama, he knows the panel of Mufti Ikram that decided this, and he admitted to me, he said that yes, we do have a problem, especially around the time of like March and April, we do have problems. He clearly said to me, he said, there's not one defining body in the country where we've all sat down and had ijma on anything for us to move forward. We haven't come to a conclusion. We don't have the answers, right? So this is openly understood in the inner circles. It's, somebody will apply some other wavering of ḥaraj, and what will happen is they'll use one of the different methodologies, and then that will, the times will be off, right? So you know someone's applying one methodology based on the times, and another madrasa or mosque is applying a different methodology. And the reason they're doing that is because there's no consensus that, hey, let's all agree on a unified approach, right? So 100% I agree with you. There is a problem. There is a problem. I also acknowledge that problem, and I agree there is a problem. But inside that problem, when we move to the time where Isha gets very, very late, for me that's ḥaraj. For me that's ḥaraj, because now we have, today is the last day of Isha, it's 12 o'clock. Tomorrow is no Isha. So well, if you let it get to 12 o'clock and now you're applying a principle at 12 o'clock and you're pushing it all the way back to 10 o'clock now, then why couldn't you do that a few weeks earlier?
Because Isha was coming in.
This is ijtihad, right?
The situation is completely different.
Yes, because the situation is different. But they applied ijtihad.
That's almost like saying, why do you not fast before Ramadan comes in and then suddenly start fasting when Ramadan comes in? Because obviously the situation is different. Isha was coming in, you have to follow the time, and then Isha stops coming in, you do something different. Now, I'm not saying you take it back to 10 p.m. or anything like that. Let me ask you about what's wrong with what I've said. If they are going to pray Isha before the time comes in, I don't agree with doing that. But if they are going to do it, why don't they just pray Maghrib and immediately after that?
Combine, why don't they take a Shafi'i approach, right? Yeah. Which actually makes a lot of sense, right? Because then you've killed off all dissent. You're all unified. There's no longer, like ḥaraj. Where do we define ḥaraj, right? You can all make a unified date and say we're going to combine prayers, we're going to take the Shafi'i approach. Now, one problem I have with the ulama of the UK is that they're so staunch when it comes to the Hanafi madhab. No, it's almost like if you take on a dispensation from another school, it's haram, you can't do it.
But right? Sayyidi, here in this discussion, just like you quoted Imam al-Nawawi and 1/6 of the night, 1/7 of the night, they'll quote him here. Why not just quote him for joining the prayers? It makes no sense.
Right, so it's like traveling, right? People will endure hardships upon themselves, but they won't combine their prayers, right? If you, I don't see a problem with taking a dispensation if you're not going to abuse the system, and if it genuinely aids you in your worship and your because we're not in a Muslim country, right? There's not even unification here anyway. I mean, all four madhahib are represented here. It's not like you're in a mono madhab country like Central Asia, all Hanafis, and then like Far East, Shafi'is, and then like Maghrib, we're multi madahib here, right? So we can facilitate ease, and these are some of the areas that our ulama don't sit down to come together on, and then they acknowledge that there are some problems, right? So I do agree with you, but for me the differing point is ḥaraj, right? And that they have. I don't
differ with you on ḥaraj. I've said it repeatedly. I agree there's ḥaraj. It's how you're going to remove that. I agree. ḥaraj for the listeners, again, hardship. I agree there's hardship. I've said it so many times. I agree. Asking somebody to pray at midnight or even past midnight and then get up at 3:30 and pray Fajr and then go to work, that is hardship. Even when I cited Mufti Maulana Qasimi, Yaqub Qasimi, he's called. Even then I said, I agree. I disagree with their solution to that ḥaraj. Their solution should be something already existent within hadith, within the madhabs. Don't make up something new. Okay? We have the concept of joining prayers even when Isha is coming in, right? We as Hanafis, Muzdalifah night, of course that's very unique and I understand that. So we have that, but Shafi madhab, Isha is coming in, but you are a traveler, you are allowed to join the prayers. That fits our circumstance. Isha is coming in, there is ḥaraj, and then you start joining the prayers. Not only is it more aligned with what already exists in hadith and exists in sharia, it actually helps so much more. I don't understand why anybody would advocate for the opposite. Why would anybody advocate for no, that's not removing the ḥaraj? Sayyidi, I believe I'm removing the ḥaraj better than your friends.
But this is what I'm saying. See, this is what I'm saying. So yes, right. So this is going back to my argument with the understanding of the madhab Hanafi madhab by the Shami scholars, whereas based the indoor pack are very strict, right?
That's
they would, yeah, that's the whole problem.
We need an entire discussion on how the madhab works. Look, Hanafi Imams, starting with the first person I know that spoke about taking a rukhsa in detail was Ibn Humam, rahimahullah ta'ala. Maybe others done it beforehand. You have references, Imam Abu Yusuf done this according to this madhab and such things, but in detail, a detailed discussion on taking a rukhsa was Ibn Humam, right? What did he say? He clearly said it's permissible. What gives Turkish Hanafis, Shami Hanafis, Egyptian Hanafis, Bengali Hanafis, Pakistani Hanafis the right to say, no, we disagree? Okay, you disagree, give me something, give me an equal authority to Ibn Humam, okay? Give me a superior authority to Ibn Humam. Other scholars who came afterwards, certainly Ibn Abidin, he spoke about the same issue, and he agreed with Ibn Humam that rukhsa is permitted. Sayyidi, I don't agree with this idea that something is established in our books, but subcontinent Hanafis can disagree with it, or Shami Hanafis can disagree with it. No, why? Why do they have the right to do that? And I'm not trying to be biased against subcontinent Hanafis. I will say the same for the Shamis. On the issue of zakat nisab, a lot of Shamis go with gold. Okay, I strongly disagree with that. The generality of subcontinent scholars go with silver. I'm completely in agreement with them. Why? Not because I'm Pakistani or I studied in Sham, because when you look at the books of the madhab, it is very, very clear that we should be using nisab silver. I don't care about my affiliation. I care about having a methodology that everybody has to follow. That's how deen works. That's how principles work. If we say that, oh yeah, we follow this principle, but then yeah, these scholars, they can just do their own thing. The subcontinent scholars, unless they can show us that the sound position in the Hanafi madhab is taking rukhsa is haram, unless they can show us that that's a sound position, they're not allowed to do that. And unless the Shamis can show us that the sound position in the madhab is taking a rukhsa is permitted, they're not allowed to promote taking a rukhsa. Now, I'm sure you've studied this issue. I've studied it. There is no doubt that the Hanafi madhab is taking a rukhsa. So for us to say, oh, but the subcontinent scholars, they're really averse to taking rukhsa, so they just pray Isha an hour after Maghrib. Nonsense. Take the rukhsa, take it correctly. I won't take it because I'm not convinced yet that we can give a blanket rukhsa here, okay? But they seem to be convinced. They seem to believe it's ḥaraj. Okay? They seem to give a blanket fatwa that during this period you can just pray Isha before it comes in. They're already doing that. They're already there. So let them tell their public, we're going to join Maghrib and Isha. They will. That's a much better solution to ḥaraj. How much better and easier would it be for people?
Yeah, it's interesting what you say, because even...
I'm so sorry, Sadie, just one last thing. I'm sorry about this. And again, you can disagree with me. I'm speculating. I feel one of the reasons they're not doing that is that then the public will know what's going on. Most of the public doesn't know that they're praying Isha before it comes in. Soon as you join Maghrib and Isha together, everybody will know. But that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Why is that a bad thing? Transparency.
Before you go ahead, I was just going to say we're coming towards the end of the time now, yeah? So let's give Brother Armin...
We've got about 10 minutes. I think we're nearly done anyway.
Yeah. So,
we're done.
You and then we go towards the conclusion.
I think one of the problems is even in the Shafi'i madhab, there are conditions with the joining prayers, and they're specific as well, right? So you can even go as far as saying as well, your conditions might be different from mine, right? And then like your ḥaraj and my ḥaraj is different, and then you shouldn't make a habit of it if you're doing it, and how you do it. So it gets messy there as well.
So I agree 100% with this, and that's why I'm not advocating joining prayers, because it is messy and it is detailed. That's why what I've done at Islam Answers, I've put up Sheikh Muhammad Jamili's video. The details are there. People can go and see and look at the details. There's also a live Q&A that followed up afterwards. A lot of the more detailed questions were answered. I agree with yourself 100%. It's not straightforward and it's not simple. That's why I'm not advocating that. I have not made a video to this day saying everybody pray Maghrib and Isha together. I don't do that. That's not my practice, and I haven't advocated. All I'm saying is those people are already doing that, already praying Isha before it comes in. This makes more sense for them. That's all I'm saying. You're 100% right. It's messy, it's detailed. It's not as simple as Shafis allow you to pray Isha early once it goes past 11 p.m. Yeah, you're 100% right on that. But what I'm saying is that they're already doing this stuff. So then just do it properly. As Sheikh Samir said as well, he said, I disagree with it, but if they're really going to do that, then pray Maghrib, pray Isha, pray it together.
Just a question here. Sheikh Samir is a Hanafi, right?
Yeah.
So what's his understanding of this? What does he do when it comes to late Isha?
He prays on time.
So like 11:30, 12, 12:30.
Yeah. Because Sheikh Samir for years.
I think the latest time would be 12 on 21st of June. The latest time would be about 12:48.
Yeah. So if we want to speak about him specifically, he for a long time he used to do a course. It was called the Halaqa course here in the summer, in other times as well, but often in the summer. So obviously he was coming when it was an issue. And initially he used to always pray at 15 degrees. He accepted 18 degrees as Abu Hanifa's position, but obviously he recognized it's a difference of opinion. He used to pray at 15 degrees. Then when I informed him, and I think Sheikh Muhammad Jamili was with me as well, I can't recall, but I informed him 13 degrees is definitely red twilight. He started to pray. He did not immediately, he took a little bit of time, but he started to pray at 13 degrees. But he never prayed it before.
Yeah, the twilight finishes at 15. Right, the Shafaq al-Ahmar finishes at 15. That's what it is.
No problem, inshallah. I'm speaking about it disappearing. The disappearance is.
Yeah, it disappears. Yeah, it disappears.
Yeah.
I think that's about it. Yeah, we've kind of wrapped up.
Move on to the conclusions and a message you might want to give to the audience, and then we'll finish with that. Yeah. So, Brother Amir, would you like to go ahead first?
My conclusion is what it was at the start of this discussion is I agree 99% with what Sheikh Nooruddeen, esteemed Sheikh, is saying. My disagreement was only in the late months, right? So we're talking about just before perpetual twilight. For me, that's ḥaraj. And for me, I can understand why they started to implement through their own ijtihad those plans in place before their time. I can understand that, and I'm no one to challenge them, so I would have to agree with them. But the Sheikh here, obviously he's got his points, and I clearly understand where he's coming from also, and I respect what he's saying also. But because I'm not a mufti mutlaq, I'm not a mujtahid, so I can't say, I want to stay in my lane. I can't say certain things, right? So that's the reason why, but I respect our Sheikh's view, and yes, he has strong points. I could even agree with him and say, yeah, you've got completely sensible points. But what about the ulama at that time who, close to ḥaraj, close to the perpetual twilight days, they implement the methods? I side with them only because they're ulama, right? And I have some trust in them. Apart from that, I believe that there's mistakes, there's great mistakes, and we both agree, right? So that's what I.
In your conclusion, you left a small point there which the Sheikh is going to address. So Sheikh, please go ahead, conclude on a message for the audience.
No. So inshallah, I'm confident that I'm staying in my lane and not being a mujtahid mutlaq. I feel I'm staying in my lane correctly, which is I'm saying everybody stay in your lane. Nobody start making ijtihad, which is outside of the four madhabs. Everybody stay in your lane. Okay. Everybody follow the methodology of Ahlul Sunnah, Quran, Sunnah, and classical scholars agreed upon works. Don't deviate from your lane and start saying we're 50 ulama, we're gonna invent something new. Don't do that. So again, I agree with Ustadh Amir. Most of what we're saying, we're in agreement with regards to, but and inshallah maybe we'll have a discussion regarding methodology. I can guarantee you, I can find situations where you have 50, 60, 100 ulama who have sat down and given a fatwa. Ustadh Amir will disagree with that fatwa. I have no doubt with regards to that, and I can give him example after example if he doesn't agree that that's the case. So I'm saying this in principle for Ustadh Amir, it does not work. When he says they're great ulama, who am I to disagree? He will disagree with other people who are great ulama too. And if we have a situation where everybody just has their own group of great ulama that they won't disagree with. The Salafis have their Salafi great ulama, they don't disagree with. The Bareilwis have theirs, the Deobandis have theirs, the Sufis have theirs. We don't have a united methodology. What's going to unite us? We have a united methodology when we say Quran, Hadith, and classical scholars. But in any case, I thank Ustadh Amir a great deal. Alhamdulillah, as always, he was very forthright. Where he disagreed with me, he made it very clear. Where he agreed with me, he made it very clear. Allah Most High bless him. And my message to the audience is exactly Ustadh Amir's message to the audience as well. Look into this issue. Try to understand it. Don't just turn a blind eye with regards to it. It's very, very important. It affects your fast. It affects your prayers. It's incredibly important. Understand it. And any Maulana who just answers you with one sentence, oh, Isha is not even coming in. Know your stuff so you can actually have a detailed discussion. I'm telling you from practical experience, a lot of the Imams and Maulanas in the masajid, they don't know this issue. And this is why I'm so glad Ustadh Amir, mashallah, I disagree with him very strongly, but he made a strong argument for some of what they're doing. I've never heard anybody else make as strong an argument in the past. It's just nonsense now. But it made a much, much stronger argument. I disagree with it very strongly. Alhamdulillah, Allah Most High bless us all and guide us to the haqq and grant us tawfiq to practice it.
Jazakumullah khair to both of you, and especially Brother Amir, for coming on again. And I mean, I would love to have you again, like I said before as well, because there's these discussions that, you're having with the Shaykh NOORUDDEEN, I think they are very, they're very clear, they are very, mashallah, decent, they're civilized. Like I said in the beginning, compared to some other people who, there's a basically throwing, chairs at each of them tables.
Well, if I had the lung capacity, I would have shouted today.
I apologize.
I have my voice. I have my voice as well.
Yeah. So I mean, no, thank you very much for that. And we're going to come to an end now.
I don't shout. I mean, I respect the Sheikh. I had a word
I
with
hope
him
I didn't shout. I get passionate, but at no point did I intend any disrespect to Ustadh Amir. And I love his style. Allah Most High bless him. And that's why we keep having these discussions, is that he is forthright. When he disagrees, he disagrees. Alhamdulillah. And when he agrees, that's also made clear. We don't want a situation when I'm discussing with somebody who disagrees and he doesn't, he doesn't mention his disagreement. So alhamdulillah, it was really good. And inshallah, maybe the next one will be about methodology. Inshallah.
Yeah, methodology, by the way, nobody's going to get that one. Nobody's going to understand that one, because that's usul, right? Usul itself is an incredibly complex, difficult subject. Inshallah, we'll find another topic to talk about, inshallah.
Both of you, and Assalamu alaikum.
Something more pertinent to what's happening.
Yeah.
No problem.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.